And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. We got a great show in store for you today. Welcoming back James Melo, a musicologist, who's going to talk about his ensemble. Tell me again the ensemble
for
of
the Romantic Century.
Romantic Century. We live. Which century is that? The 21st?
19.
The 19th was the Romantic Century, right? And you're talking about the life of the great, I guess, I don't know, poet, raconteur, social outcast of all times,
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
And he was 100 years ahead, as we were discussing, 100 years ahead of his time.
In many ways, yes.
Yes.
So.
And great. So first of all, let's start for all the people out there who might be challenged on their knowledge of famous people in history, who Oscar Wilde was. Tell us about him. I almost think we should have put a picture of him on the back. It's all right.
He was many things rolled into one, I would say, but essentially a playwright, a poet, and a critic. And very influential in late 19th century in England and, of course, in Europe. And one of the incredible things that happened in his life is that he actually came to the US to deliver a series of lectures on aesthetics to miners in Colorado and Montana, and there are wonderful stories about him drinking beer with the miners,
tough guys, right?
And talking about wallpaper.
Right.
And interior decoration. So,
well, the miners in those days were organized in the Industrial Workers of the World and the Western Federation of Miners, so they were like cutting edge. Yes, they were cutting edge of American society.
And it's amazing. You can tell from some of the pictures in the papers that they were glued to what he was saying. You can see their faces like they are entranced.
Right.
And
they were desperate for a better life.
Yeah.
They were desperate for a better life.
And Oscar Wilde brought this sort of a completely different environment to them, something that was at once remote, but also they could relate, because Oscar Wilde had this profound insight into the human psyche, and he was extremely good at finding the tone of a particular phrase that would simply tell you everything that he needed to tell in a very short.
A mastered language.
Yes, definitely. That was one of the things that probably made for much of his reception in Europe and England.
What's some of his most famous work that people should know?
Well, there is the picture of Dorian Gray, the only novel that he wrote.
Right.
And it's
I've seen the movie.
Yes, there have
frightening.
It is, because there is this idea of, the subject of the painting never ages,
right?
And the painting does. So it's almost as if all the vices and corruption that would attend someone's life are being loaded into the picture.
Right.
So it's at the same time some sort of morality play in many ways, but it's also a beautifully written novel. And one interesting thing about that is that parts of the novel were used by the prosecutor during the trial,
right,
when he was being accused.
Oscar Wilde was gay, right?
Yes.
And was he openly gay, or was it discovered?
It's a complex situation, because the word homosexuality, let's say, per se, did not yet exist at the time that he was tried and convicted. But it was obvious that he had relationships with men. On the other hand, he was married, had 2 children. And I think that the main problem with his lifestyle was not so much that people realized that he had relationships with men, but he began to cross the class boundaries. And for the British, this was quite hard to take. It was almost more unforgivable.
He was from the upper class, or
very much,
and he was hanging out with people in the lower class.
He began to do that. Yes.
Oh, that was his boyfriends?
Well, he had a very long relationship with a nobleman, Lord Alfred Douglas, but he definitely was involved with lower class, let's say. We have to use the terminology, because that's what
the
they
lower social economic class, not low class people, but lower social economic classes.
For the British, this was very significant. And then a very interesting thing that was happening a little before the trial in 1895, and which also set the context for many things that happened after. there was a well-known male brothel in London, and there was a big scandal some years before Oscar Wilde was tried.
A male brothel, a male whorehouse.
Yes.
Right.
With rumors that some of the members from the aristocracy were patronizing it.
Right, but London was the capital of prostitution in the whole world. It was the sex capital of the world. New York was in competition, but London, they were trying to match up to London. So it's sort of strange that the English would all of a sudden find this morality, right? But it was the class crossing.
I think so, because, for instance, he was prosecuted under a law that was reenacted or put in the books in 1885. And that's a very interesting thing, because the law itself was to protect young girls from prostitution.
Sure.
And then one of the legislators, Henry Labouchere, at the last minute, literally, he added this clause about sodomy.
I see.
And that was the one that ensnared Oscar Wilde.
Well, how did he get caught?
There were actually 3 trials. We say the trial of Oscar Wilde, at least the name of the program is the trial of Oscar Wilde, I mean our concert for the ensemble, because I want to focus on this idea of the entire ordeal that he went through.
Right. And when I guess this is a good time to stop and say, give us the technical details. What do we need to know? Where is it going to be?
Yes, the trial of Oscar Wilde is going to be a theatrical concert, which is a fully staged with
say that again,
actors.
I'm sorry, the theatrical?
Theatrical concert.
Theatrical concert?
Yeah, concert.
Concert, theatrical.
Yes.
It'll be a theatrical concert.
Yes, we have a dramatic script with actors playing Oscar Wilde and the prosecutor and other characters.
And where will it be shown?
At Symphony Space.
And when will it be shown?
It's going to be 4 performances from June 19 to the 21st.
So it's coming up?
Yes, coming up.
Next
On Saturday
week?
there are 2 performances, a matinee at 2 o'clock and an evening show at 8.
And is there a web page that people can go to?
Yes, to symphonyspace.org, and also for the ensembles for the Romantic Century, romanticcentury.org.
romanticcentury.org and symphonyspace.org. All right, and it's this weekend. It's coming up.
Yes, yes. The first performance is Thursday.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, good. So, all right, good. So now let's go to the trial of Oscar Wilde. Getting to because Oscar Wilde is a well-known person. He's as well-known as a New York Times movie reviewer, play reviewer. He's himself an author. He's a poet. He's in the highest echelons of society. He's seen with nobility all the time, and he's a sort of almost like a very British. He's represents British society to the world in many ways, right?
I think so. And in fact, when he was prosecuted, he was at the absolute height of his career.
Why would you go after somebody who's at the height of their career, who's representing your own country and your own society?
Yes. Well, what happened is that he was involved with this young man, Lord Alfred Douglas, and Lord Alfred Douglas' father, the Marquis of Queensberry, was very angry with the whole situation.
The guy from the rules, the boxing rules guy.
Yes,
the Marquis
precisely.
of Queensberry rules.
Precisely.
That sounds a pretty macho guy,
yeah.
right?
There's actually one section, the script, where there's a confrontation between the two. I mean, the program now that is going to happen. And
the Marquis of Queensberry rules are the rules of boxing.
Yes.
That are today, you know, like
that's him.
Right. The same
that
guy.
Very same
the
person.
Father of the person he was having an affair with.
Lord Alfred Douglas, who was a very talented, very handsome young man, but a little problematical and with a difficult relationship with his father. So one day, Lord Queensberry came to the club where Oscar Wilde was and left a calling card, and he scribbled on the card to Oscar Wilde posing sodomite. He misspelled the word sodomite. So that was almost like a public accusation.
Right.
So Oscar Wilde was very angry, and he decided to prosecute Lord Queensberry for defamation and libel.
I see.
And his friends...
Not a good idea when it's true.
No. His friends advised him not to do it, but he decided to do it. And so they began to look for evidence to see if Lord Queensberry's accusation had any merit. And they did find it. So then he was prosecuted. Oscar Wilde then was prosecuted for the first time, and then a hung jury, and then a second time, and he was convicted. Now the conviction is interesting because he was very witty and sparkly.
Sure. Right.
And
during the trial, as a
during
witness,
the trial, he was actually essentially performing, and people were laughing. They just recognized in him.
Most lawyers would advise against that as an approach.
But he was very famous. His most famous play, The Importance of Being Earnest, was being shown in London
at the same time.
He was on trial. So people were just having a good time with this man that was very intelligent and very flamboyant. And then, at some point during the trial, when the prosecutor brought in one of the lower class young men, and apparently Oscar Wilde had given some little gifts or tokens of affection to him, and the prosecutor construed that as being paid prostitution.
What did the lower class guy look like? I mean, was he like a bald guy with the suspenders and the dark boots? I mean, that's an old look in England.
Yeah.
Right?
No, he was apparently very handsome as well. And so from there on, you can even, there are transcripts of the trial, and you can feel when that evidence was presented, the whole tone changed. And probably that was the moment when I began to look at Oscar Wilde in a different way and say, well,
what is it? We were talking about this before. What is about England and class? I mean, it's funny. They were the English were the great they opposed. They were abolitionists and slavery. They stopped. They always tried to raise themselves up as the great moralists, and yet they turn around and prosecute their own kind. Right? It's sort of like eating your own, right? Consuming.
It is a very interesting, not to say intriguing, situation. This whole interest in the idea of class, of social class, and you never cross it. And even the way to address someone.
So we don't really have in the United States so much. It's not the same way.
No. And I think even today, in England itself, even though it's a little better, there is still some remnants you can feel in the way people discuss some things. So I think it has a very long history in the country. And in late 19th century, of course, it was at the top of everyone's head in the sense of you couldn't forget it, right? In terms of all the novels and all the way the different professions work and relate to one another, this was always present. So one of the things that the prosecutor did actually was bring into the whole process of confronting Oscar Wilde with his lifestyle, referring all the time to the
class nature,
the class issue,
almost
like he was coming down and soiling himself, by allowing himself to come into contact and by extension, of course, shaming everyone who was part of his own social milieu. So that was a very serious thing.
All right, James Melo, musicologist. How does a musicologist discover and get involved in the trial of Oscar Wilde? What does a musicologist do? We asked you that before last time you were here, but for those who weren't listening, run it by us. A musicologist.
I tend to think of musicologists as an art historian. What we do for, let's say, curating an exhibition at a museum, we do for maintaining a performing tradition in classical music and, by extension, also in jazz and different kinds of repertories. But in relation to the group itself, to the Romantic Ensemble for the Romantic Century, which is now on the 13th season in New York, we produce these theatrical concerts with a drama and a script based on primary sources like poetry, letters, and diaries, and then a musical repertory that resonates with it. So for me, as a musicologist, the primary interest was the contemporaneous music that Oscar Wilde would have heard at the time. So there are actually pieces by a French composer called Ernest Chausson, who was almost completely a contemporanean of Oscar Wilde, because he was born 1 year later than Oscar Wilde and died 1 year earlier. So they are actually very part of the same cultural milieu. So I put this script together because the story interests me very much. The language itself is exceedingly beautiful. Oh, he's incredibly refined turn of phrases, and there are transcripts from the trials which give a strong,
Where did he
dramatic
study?
punch.
Where did Oscar Wilde go to college? I imagine he did.
Yeah, he went to Trinity College in Dublin and then to Magdalen College in Oxford.
Oh, I
and
see. Is he British or Irish?
Irish.
Irish. And I know basic stuff that everybody who knows Oscar Wilde would know, but we might not all know that. Yeah. And so, did that play into it? The fact that he was Irish in England?
I tend to think not, but it's very hard to say for sure because by then, again, he was so greatly admired as a playwright, as an English playwright, and I don't think that the Irish heritage had anything to do with that. No.
Did he have support? In
during
other words,
the trial?
During the trial, that people were there, because there was a time of protest then too. Were people picketing or protesting and things like that?
Well, there were a group of friends and some close acquaintances that sort of tried to rescue him. I think when the trial developed in a very, very systematic way, it was really a matter of saying, how can you get this man out of this terrible situation? Right. But on the other hand, a lot of them were also concerned because they could not reveal themselves.
Oh, they would get in trouble too.
Yeah, they would be in trouble too. And so Lord Alfred Douglas, for example, was one of them who very soon distanced himself from Oscar Wilde. And there is this very moving and poignant document that Oscar Wilde wrote from prison. It's De Profundis, which is a letter that's about 110 pages or so, addressed to Lord Douglas when Oscar Wilde talked about this whole ordeal when he was leaving prison and the story of the two of them together. He never sent the letter. He was allowed to keep it. In other words, the
prison authorities wouldn't let him send it.
No,
because it would stir up support, maybe. For
yeah,
so they're afraid of, right?
Yes.
In England, they're strict about that kind of thing. So, how long he was sent to prison? How long did he stay in prison?
2 years with forced labor.
2 years of forced labor.
Yes, and the judge who pronounced the sentence. I actually include the whole sentence in the script of the production. It's a very harsh pronouncement because you can see from the phrase that the judge would love to have the opportunity to pass an even harder sentence on him. It was the maximum that was allowed, and the judge said that unfortunately he cannot do more. So he's going to give the maximum that he can do. And it is very clear that after Oscar Wilde served the 2 years with hard labor, and he had a very hard time. He was deprived of books. At the beginning, for him, was a torture. And eventually he was allowed to read some because people intervene from outside, saying, well, he needs those kinds of things.
What kind of labor, like breaking rocks?
Breaking rocks, yes. And one day he was so weak from the very poor food that they were given, and they had to attend church and the sermons and everything. And he collapsed and banged his right ear on the floor. And a lot of people think that that was actually what caused his death, because 3 years after he was released, he had a severe case of cerebral meningitis, and doctors think that some sort of damage to the trauma was what caused it. So it literally destroyed him. After he was released, he was definitely not the same person. He actually took a pseudonym and he began to wander alone in the boulevards of Paris. He never went back to England. Went to France and died in a kind of very shabby hotel room.
Everybody, America and England, they always wind up in France when that happens to them.
That's what he actually said something, Oscar Wilde. That is one of his efforts. He says, every good American, when they die, they go to Paris. And then they ask, and what happened to the bad Americans? They say, those stay in America.
New York.
And that is one thing that is, I don't know if it's completely, people debate the accuracy of this particular aphorism, but when he came to the US to embark on this series of lectures, the newspapers quoted him by saying, at the customs they say, well, Mr. Wilde, do you have anything to declare? And he said, I have nothing to declare but my genius.
So I'll remember that one.
Yes.
That's a good music genius. Yeah. So tell us again, it's coming up this weekend. All right, the
Ensemble for the Romantic Century. It's a theatrical concert based on the trial of Oscar Wilde. You have two terrific actors who are going to play Oscar Wilde and Lord Queensberry, and the person who plays Lord Queensberry also will do the prosecutor.
It's an old story, right?
Yes, yes.
It's an old story. It could be like any, it repeated itself, I'm sure, many times in some format.
Yes,
right?
yes. And then an incredible musical program with very major chamber music works by French and British composers.
Right, and James Melo, you're a musicologist, so a key part of your role in this is to find the music that would fit the period and the theme.
Yes,
and the
I help with the research, and for this particular production, I wrote the script of this one. And one thing that the ensemble also does, which is part of our production from the very beginning, we always give a pre-concert lecture where we put the whole production context and
historical context.
Yes, yes, it's part of a little bit of an educational part of it.
So that's coming up this Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
And Saturday, 2 performances on Saturday.
Right, and you can find out more.
Evening.
Symphonyspace.org.
Yeah,
right,
and romanticcentury.org
as well. All right, so great. So people can go there and find out about it, and even go and see the show and learn something about.
Yes,
as we're learning today about this great man. And
it's a very dramatic production.
Did what he went through? Did it have an effect in changing British attitudes towards homosexuality? No, it was
not in England. In France, yes, because actually the French writers were very sympathetic to him, and he actually appears in a section of Proust's big novel. He doesn't mention Oscar Wilde by name, but the draft from the novel indicate that he did want to actually cite Oscar Wilde's name, but it's clear who he's describing. I mean, he talks about this whole ordeal that Oscar Wilde went through.
Right.
So in the continent, in France and other places, there was a repercussion, but in England, no.
Right, right.
Which is again part of the
like
sadness
Josephine Baker.
thing.
It's like, I think of the American Josephine Baker had a similar situation. So how did Oscar Wilde, because now he's sort of iconic figure, when did he transfer into an iconic figure, or was he always?
I think he always was. The British probably would have preferred that he didn't have the kind of lifestyle that he had. And actually he himself made a joke about it. The people said how he was feeling. This is after he was released from prison. They were concerned about his health and so on and so forth. And he said, well, I'm sure that I'm not going to live past the century, he said.
See. And when did he die?
Precisely on 1900.
1900.
Yes, and then he complemented that by saying, the British could not stand it if I lived past the century.
I see.
So he was very much aware of this sort of
because that would like assume that like his lifestyle, his way of living would transfer.
Yes, or he just could continue to be alive, the kind of person that he was, and for the British it was a very hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Yes.
As it turned out to be.
Yes. But today, of course, he's revered all over the world. I mean, his aphorisms and his...
How about in England? How do they deal with this in England? Do you know that? I mean, to me,
I don't know very much in terms of the minutiae of the reception of his works in England, but I think they probably... let's say, embrace him in some way.
Right.
I don't know what they think in terms of the class issue or the gay lifestyle.
Right.
I'm not sure. Because, for instance, that same
it's a scandal.
law,
it would be a scandal. I mean, it's like taking your most famous person and then pilloring them in front of the whole population because of their sexual preference.
Yes, yes. But you see, that same amendment to that law that Henri Labouchere added, that convicted Oscar Wilde, it was only removed as a criminal offense in 1967.
Really?
Yeah. So even though maybe there was not active prosecution of it, it was still there on the book. So it took a little while.
Right.
And but I don't think that today they look at Oscar Wilde from that perspective anymore. I mean, in England.
Right.
They know what happened. They try to forget because it's obvious you cannot deny the geniality and the impact that he has all over the world. It's almost like trying to cover the sun with a a sieve or something, and you just let it go and let him be who he was this incredible artist. That
So what brought you? You wrote the script for this play. How many actors are in it?
two
actors.
One of them plays
Right.
double role.
So is it in the context of the trial?
Yes, there is.
Is there is the judge there?
There is the judge, yes.
The judge, Oscar Wilde, Lord Queensberry, his accuser.
Yeah.
And they...
Bosie makes an appearance. Bosie is the nickname for Lord Alfred Douglas.
I see. Bose?
So, Bosie.
Bosie.
Yes.
Bosie.
So he makes an appearance, but it's a silent role. And we have an incredible scene with 4 men singing the barbershop quartet from Elgar. It's called the Green Carnation, because Oscar Wilde wore green carnations, a kind of an identifier, so they make an appearance too.
Sure.
And the musicians, there are a whole string quartet, and they participate in the action as well. So the music and the drama goes hand in hand, and there's a lot of interaction between the actors and the musicians. It's fully staged and everything.
Couple of minutes left. What should we learn? What do you think people should learn from the trial of Oscar Wilde and from what happened to him? What's the lesson for our today? Or what do we bring forward to this time?
I'd say that we cannot legislate morality or psychology. There is the private citizen and there is the public citizen. The public citizen, when you interfere in the sort of other people's rights and the way the society develops and economics or social, that's fine. You have laws to keep everyone in good stand. But your private life is concerns only you and whoever chooses to be with you. It cannot be legislated. Human nature is not amenable to being put in a cage. And every time people try to do that, it was always a disaster. It never...
I was thinking Montgomery Clift in America, the famous actor.
Yes.
He smoked, what they caught him smoking a joint or something,
Yes.
and they destroyed him.
Destroy, yes. So, and what for, right? I mean, it's something...
He was a great actor.
They are a great actor, or a great writer, or a great musician, or a great painter. Michelangelo, for example, who had, clearly relationship with young men, and yet he painted the Sistine Chapel. So are you going to demolish it because of that?
No, I think they were more open 500 years ago.
Yeah.
For some strange reason, right? It wasn't a threat to him as much as it was.
So I think the Oscar Wilde trial is very emblematic of that thing.
Right.
It does not work. It shouldn't happen.
Right.
And
it's a cautionary tale.
It's a cautionary tale. Yes.
Right. And it's an embarrassment to England now. I mean.
I think so. I mean, because you cannot erase this. The historical record is there. You can try to live in a different way by sort of covering it up in many ways. But the history of a country, it's there for everyone to see. It's not going to go away. Interesting. Okay, James Melo, thank you. Last half a minute, anything you'd like to add that we should know about Oscar Wilde, about your play? But tell us again where it's going to be. Symphony Space at Broadway 95th, and it's going to be Thursday, Friday, and 2 performances on Saturday at 2 o'clock and at 8 o'clock. Okay. Go to the symphonyspace.org and romanticcentury.org. Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate having you on. You're welcome. Thank you. Again. Thank you. We'll see you next week.